Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brooks Rakeford. I'm president of the North Carolina Technology Association, or NC Tech. Welcome to our quarterly Government Vendor Network session. And thanks for tuning into this virtual format, which will become the new normal, at least for a while, it seems. For those who are new, these sessions are an opportunity for us to invite public sector leaders to come share their activities and priorities with their current and potential business partners. As most of you know, we're fortunate to have had the expertise of Brooks Pierce Law Firm for many years as our legislative counsel, led by Ed Turlington along with his colleague Matt Bales. After our guest speakers segment, Ed and perhaps Matt will offer a brief legislative overview to close out our session. A few quick announcements. One is if you are not on mute, we'd ask that you mute your phone or your video conference. We're recording this session and would like to have a clear sound when we show it later. Also, as you can imagine, we have converted a number of our existing programs to virtual sessions, and we're adding new content as well. Just a couple of weeks ago, I hosted a presentation by a top economist who shared the latest overview and forecast on the COVID-19 economic impact on North Carolina. And last week, we hosted a conversation with Representative Jason Sain. He is, as most of you know, senior chairman of the House Appropriations Committee, also is co-chair of the Joint Legislative Oversight Committee on IT, and most recently he is helping lead the House Select Committee on COVID-19. That is made up of 4 working groups, and economic policy is one of those. We discussed with him how the state is responding to the economic impact on individuals and businesses, as well as on the state itself. Both of those videos are now posted on our website. We have a new section called NC Tech Pulse. You'll find that at nctech.org under the Resources tab. We also conducted a poll at the beginning of the month of several hundred leaders in the tech sector on how the pandemic is affecting their operations, sales, hiring plans, and more. We also asked their predictions on when they expect to see signs of recovery, as well as a return to in-person interaction. The poll garnered a lot of attention, including in the media, and so we are conducting that same poll at the midpoint and end of each month in April, May, and June. The mid-April poll results were just released, and you can check those out at the same NC Tech Pulse tab on our website. We've had strong interest from both sponsors and participants in our virtual programming, so we have consolidated these leadership discussions into what we have temporarily named our Executive Conversations series, a name that is under some revision, I think, as we speak, but to try to consolidate this sort of programming going forward, and frankly, will be part of our offerings ongoing. We have a dozen or more leaders on tap already confirmed, and we're just working on time with them, ranging from the president of Lenovo North America to the CIO of Blue Cross, to a joint discussion with the mayors of Raleigh and Charlotte, to the Attorney General of North Carolina, and more. Please be sure to follow our online calendar and be in touch with me if your company is interested in sponsoring one of these individual sessions, which comes with an opportunity to be visible like today and have a few words of remarks during the program, or to sign on as a series sponsor for recognition across a handful of these as we move forward. Lastly, we have for a number of years hosted an in-person job fair in the Triangle and in Charlotte, but each spring and fall. This year we have implemented a new platform that allows us to offer a virtual job fair. It actually brings several advantages, including a broader geographic reach. Clearly people would not be limited based on where they are. Contact information for all the candidates who participate in the job fair, not just those who come up to your booth, and a number of other premium opportunities over the in-person gatherings that we've held in the past. So we've had really strong interest already. You'll see the companies that are already signed up to participate, and we encourage you to visit our site to learn more about how to be part of that and what employers are already there. Please share with this information with those in your organization who are responsible for this sort of thing. And in the follow-up email to all of you from this event, we'll include a link to that information. A quick word of instruction for today's session, since we're not together in person. First, please begin submitting brief questions for our guest speakers by using the Q&A function while they're speaking. and I'll try to work them in as time permits toward the end. Again, the Q&A function is distinct from the chat function. If you have a technical difficulty, please use the chat feature, and our staff will monitor that and try to respond to you directly. But use the Q&A function to submit questions. And that will also apply to Ed Turlington's segment near the end when he does our overview on legislation. So with that, let me thank our sponsor for today's session, Spectrum Enterprise. They're a longtime and very supportive member of NC Tech. Please welcome Janet Thompson, who will say a few words of greeting and will introduce our guests. Janet?
Thank you so much, Brooks.
Sure.
Spectrum Enterprise is pleased to be the sponsor of today's session of the NC Tech Government Vendor Network. As a proud corporate citizen of our great state, Spectrum Enterprise employs over 10,000 people, serves 2.5 million customers, and is committed to the investment in technology for the infrastructure within our great state. Today, we are honored to have with us David Roseberry, COO and CISO of the North Carolina Department of Revenue, along with their CIO, Ted Thomas. Prior to his service with the department, David spent over 9 years in the senior IT roles with RTI International, including as their CIO. He worked in the private sector for 15 years before that. Ted Thomas joined the department just a few months ago, having spent his career in the telecommunications industry in senior IT positions. We've invited David and Ted to share with us today a bit about their roles, some of the tech initiatives and priorities at the Department of Revenue, and I'm sure something about the impact of this current economic situation on the department. The Department of Revenue is a member of NC Tech, so please join me in welcoming our fellow members, David and Tom, today.
Great, thank you, David. I think you're on the line, and you're welcome to kick things off if you like, and Ted, unmute as well, then you can contribute as you all see fit. So please kick us off.
Great, thank you, appreciate it. I was going to talk a little bit today about key initiatives, but I have to start with COVID. Obviously, it had a huge impact on the state and the country, but it really had an impact on the Department of Revenue. So just a little context, when I started as CIO with Revenue about 6 or 7 years back, you would go to a meeting and there was not a single laptop, which is not the work mode I was used to. And so I've spent 5 to 6 years trying to encourage more and more laptop use at the department to encourage collaboration and people to take notes and to be able to work more remotely. I'm glad I did that because I needed it. So we kind of got to a point right before the pandemic. We had switched to Teams from Skype for Business. People were starting to get used to it, the video features. We had got some general training, but we were only at about 5% teleworking. At any point in time, you would check what was going on with the VPN. About 5% of the agency would telework at a time, and it would bump up during inclement weather days. We had reworked the entire telework policy to take into account modern technology and modern issues. Had just finished that, and we started to start thinking about being aggressive in teleworking. I was encouraging my staff to begin teleworking more frequently, to get used to working with their staff remotely. We had just started into that, and then we got hit with the pandemic. So it kind of turned us upside down. First thing is that we immediately went to daily stand-ups. I had asked the secretary to start a steering committee about 2 weeks before we wound up in a state of emergency. We had met twice, and then we were at daily briefings. It just kind of overtook us that fast. We had to scramble with policy rewrites. State was rewriting policies, and executive orders were coming out once and twice a week. And so we were just staying one step ahead of what was going on. Felt pretty good with where we were at, and then we had our first positive test of COVID in the building. So we went immediately to everybody out of the building. We wanted to make sure all the staff were safe, and obviously want to maintain production. So we closed the building and got somebody to come in and clean the entire building top to bottom for us. So first impact for us really was as we had everybody switch to go to teleworking mode, and we did it in kind of 3 waves over 2 weeks. The first was anybody with a laptop go home. The second was anybody with a desktop but was capable of working from home to go home. And the third was that we had to switch real aggressively to software-based phones instead of hard phones, and then got them all out of the building. So in a 2-week period of time, we went from 5% teleworking to over 80% teleworking, in just a 2-week period of time. Complete change for the way the department operates. Once we got there, then the law changed. So the federal government started changing at the Fed what they were going to do for taxes. We work in conjunction with the IRS trying to mirror as much of their revenue code as we can. And so we had to change our tax laws. So in tax season, we have gone all of a sudden from everybody in the building to 80% teleworking and stop in the middle of production and make significant code changes to our tax law in mid-season. So very unique situation for us. Had to demonstrate a lot of flexibility and adapting to a new work environment to boot. So then we had to re-level our portfolio of our work, because normally we're somewhat cyclical and seasonal in our nature, obviously. We collect a lot of money. About half of it or so is individual income on tax day, on April 5th. And so what we do is we plan for that. So our staff, when they're managing and watching and supporting tax season, they're actually planning for the next year. And then we get ready, and we're supposed to be done with all of our work for tax season by about Halloween, test with external vendors, and then go back into production in January. So we have this cycle kind of down pat. This totally disrupted those cycles. So we had to stop and re-level our portfolio. So generally our time frame now looks like the General Assembly will be back in late April, early May. We know that they're going to do something to address the COVID-19 pandemic, so we expect more tax law change. We are in the midst of moving our mainframe. Our mainframe is currently hosted by the Department of Information Technology, and we are moving it to IBM's mainframe as a service. So we will actually be moving the mainframe in the June-July timeframe. Tax day is now July 15th. Our non-filer initiatives will happen in September, extensions in October, which is another kind of mini rush for us. And we are planning, whether it happens or not, we are making the assumption that in flu season that the pandemic will come back, and we will have to go back out of the offices pretty aggressively. So we've decided that we'll target November 15th just to make sure that we're planning for it. Again, we have to be up for next tax season by the end of October, and open again in January. So our calendar is a total wreck, and we are adapting and being able to do all of that work and still get done. Key projects right now for us is the Secretary believes, and I agree, that we have changed the culture at Revenue. I don't think that we will ever have meetings again where we're all face-to-face. We expect that some staff will want to continue to telework. I've gotten a lot of good feedback. Staff are saving money. They're saving time in telecommuting, and commuting back and forth to work. 82% of the staff do not work in the city do not live in the city in which they work. So dropping that telecommute time is significant. They're saving money on gas. They're saving money on food. Some are saving money on daycare. So it's been a benefit to quite a few of the staff. So we think that quite a few will not want to come back in any kind of permanent way. Some will come back and never want to telecommute again. This has been tough on some people. They may like the social interactions of business, and so they may not ever want to telecommute given what's happened. And some obviously will want to flex. So the culture is going to be different when we get back. So that has launched 2 projects immediately for us in preparing for a potential return in November. We're using Teams, so we're implementing rooms for Teams. We want to make sure that when staff come back into the buildings, they have huddle rooms where they can, as a group, meet and meet with others across the agency, regardless of where they're at, whether they're teleworking or they're in another office. So we're actively doing that now. We have a pilot we're running tomorrow to build out a room to see how it works. And if that works, we'll scale it across the state to the other 13 service centers. We also get quite a lot of fax still. So we are going to put in a fax server so that we can turn that into digital instead of paper. We have to release a network RFP, which maybe Ted can talk about a little bit. And we've already released an RFP to replace our phone system. So we're targeting around November-ish to have our new phone system in. Again, soft phones. We'll have to change all the phone numbers, all of the business cards, all of the notices. So we're going to have to turn up everything in the call centers and flip that technology and be ready again when tax season opens in January. So quite a lot of stuff going on, quite a large impact. I'm very proud of the department to make that change. It's a conservative organization. Obviously, we don't like changing things around tax season because we don't want to disrupt cash flow. But they've made this very aggressive change. We actually have adapted very well. Call volumes are somewhat high. Our wait times are only about 1.5 minutes, 98% first call resolution rates, and we're processing taxes like we had every year. So it's been fantastic that we've been able to make these changes in our culture and our operating procedures and continue to innovate.
That's great. Thank you for sharing all of that. I know you want to switch to Ted here in a moment, but before you do, if I could pick up on a few things you mentioned. You mentioned some changes of software and even the mainframe as a service, other technology changes to adapt to this immediate sudden shift, which is not common. Are there other initiatives that were underway already or that are still in the pipeline that may not be related to the impact of COVID-19, but that are still in parallel, on path, on track, or maybe sidelined or delayed because of what's going on to address the impact of COVID-19?
We didn't really get to sideline anything. What we just did is we reshuffled the portfolio and took advantage of tax season being longer to actually get a little mickles out of what was going on. We have a new data center in which we need to migrate. So we have to pick up equipment and move it. We have to plan when that happens, but it's still there. That work is still there. Like I said, we did issue RFPs and awarded it for the phone. We also issued and awarded a contract for a collections case management system that will take about 1.5 years to implement. That project has started. The phones, the first project manager that was assigned actually came down with coronavirus. They did survive and they're fine now, but it did delay the start of that project. We also had some eServices, our web front, making some improvements on file and pay capabilities. That will still go into production as planned. So pretty much everything that we had in the pipeline, we continued with. We just had to kind of scramble and adapt to some of the changes.
Gotcha. Great. Well, again, I want to remind our audience to please submit questions using the Q&A chat. We have a couple that have come our way, but would like to have any of those submitted that you would like as we move along here. I think because of the fairly relative newness of Ted's role, I wonder if, David, you want to introduce Ted briefly beyond what Janet had to offer, and then let Ted share with us anything he would like to add.
Sure. We started looking for a CIO. I obviously was CIO and CISO and needed to replace myself when I became the Chief Operating Officer. So we did a pretty exhaustive search, and we're very happy to offer Ted the job. He's come on board. He is his whole life has been private sector, just like mine was before I came to revenue. It is humorous to watch because I had to go through this process of realigning and understanding how government operates. So Ted still shakes his head quite a lot and asks a lot of questions, but I think he's starting to adapt and adopt us as well.
Well, great. Well, Ted, thank you for being with us, and I'll turn it over to you for a few minutes.
Yeah, well, I'm pleased to be with everyone here today. And as David mentioned, my entire career was with the private sector. So it has been a very interesting short ride, and certainly with the pandemic, with a little bit more urgency for many of the ongoing efforts that David just mentioned. So along with just trying to educate myself on processes and procedures, budgets, staff, functions within the agency, I really attempted quite a bit to leverage some of my technical background to help with the quick ramp up for all of our teleworkers. I think I looked today, we were over 1,100 folks that we had teleworking, which is awesome. Certainly going to be very directly involved in everything from our mainframe migration to kind of re-engineering our network and relocating to kind of our new data center. Particular interest of mine and certainly a focus for the agency is to really adopt a cloud first mentality. So ensuring that we can extend our IT architectures into the cloud in a seamless way is going to be a particular focus so that we can take advantage of those economies of scale and kind of that hyperscale capability that the cloud gives you nowadays. But certainly happy to be with the agency, learning a lot about taxes, and certainly David has been a really good mentor to date. And he's right. There are many instances where I'm shaking my head as I'm moving forward, trying to adjust to kind of the culture and the inner workings of the agency. But it's been a lot of fun and certainly something new for me, spending my entire career on the other side. So I'll just leave it at that, Brooks, and we can open it up for questions.
Great, thank you. I do have a few here. One is, I think, David, you touched on this a little earlier. The federal government has been in the news quite a bit for what's going on with the IRS in terms of filings and backlog of work and people having to work remotely who had not been working remotely, et cetera. So there have just been some articles this week about the huge volume of paper. It's still a very paper-intensive organization. The volume of paper to process that will impact the speed with which refunds are returned for those who have filed. And so it leads to a question here. I know this is true nationally, probably true for North Carolina, and that is vast majority of filers receive a refund, which means they're anxious to, once they file, to get that processed and get that refund. With the delay in the deadline to the summer, talk a little bit about what kind of backlog you're seeing, if any, how you're addressing that, and does the delay in the deadline, has that moderated the flood of influx that would have started about a week ago?
So it's been interesting to watch. Up until the federal government announced that tax season was going to move, we tracked almost exactly year to year what we had previous years. Mm-hmm. Overall, we have actually over the past 6 years implemented more electronic services. So obviously individual income you can file electronically, and we added corporate and partnerships, which is huge returns. Individual returns can be 4 and 5 pages. Some large scale businesses can actually, the first year I was at Revenue, we had a semi truck roll up into the dock, and I asked what it was for. That was one taxpayer's return. So corporate and partnership
it wasn't mine,
returns can be, not mine either. But anyway, so it's can be quite a lot of paper, and that has started to mitigate and change over the years. So individual income is about 92% electronic filed. Corporate and partnerships are in the high 60s, and they're nudging up into the 70s this year. So as we were tracking, the amount of paper coming in has actually reduced.
Gotcha.
We get W-2s and 1099s and ENC3s electronic. That's reduced the paper. So actually paper is down. The bad news is that because of the change in tax season, we let a lot of the temporaries, we didn't onboard temporaries like we normally do for seasonal work. So we're understaffed. So even though we have a declining amount of paper, we have fewer staff processing it. So electronic refunds and electronic submissions are processed timely. An electronic refund request, we get out somewhere between 3 and 5 days. It used to be, when I first got there, it could be 4 weeks. So we're down into like a week time frame now. Paper takes longer. So we do encourage people to file electronically. it's safer, it is faster to process, and you're more likely to get your refunds processed faster. So
Gotcha.
it's had an impact, but a little different with the paper down, and now people have realized they don't have to file if they owe. Revenue in is down. Refunds are almost exactly where they were last year.
Got it. Thank you very much. Now, you touched on something that relates to a question that we've gotten, which has to do with outsourced staff. You mentioned the annual cyclical need for temporary workers to help process the volume that you receive. But in general, from a technology standpoint, does the department rely much on contracted augmented staff for its technology needs? And if so, how has that been affected, if at all, from this complete move to remote working and the security concerns that come with that, the need for equipment to be able to be used remotely as part of that? Speak to that a bit, maybe Ted or David.
I can talk a little bit about that. So we do have a couple of partners that, strategic partners that we work with, Revenue Solutions Incorporated and SAS in the Research Triangle Park. Are close vendors we work with every year on various parts of tax season. Because of our security requirements, they basically use our equipment even though they're remote. They have been remote, so we didn't really see any changes or risks incurred from security, so that's been pretty stable. We do augment sometimes labor, but that's usually around processing of tax, mostly physical paper, instead of augmenting labor like for IT labor. So other than the couple of vendors that we have that are with us on some of our products and services, most of the outsourcing has been physical. And like I said, we didn't really do that this year, just trying to do it on our own. And then we haven't seen a change with our vendors. Everybody just kind of kept working the way they were.
Okay. Ted, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I would just reiterate what David said. I mean, the majority of our bigger IT services come through contract or through paper. We do very little staff augmentation type work. We might do that in our project management office and then spot cases here and there. But generally, we engage third parties in one form of IT service or another for extended periods of time. And it's a very specific scope piece of work that they're providing for us.
Okay. The last question that we have that's been submitted thus far relates again to something else you said a little earlier, David, and that was, I believe you said that we're tracking about on par with submittals. Maybe I had this backward. You were talking about the timeline of where we are now as compared to last year in terms of filings as well as refunds and so on. And the question that's related to that is, because of COVID-19, are revenues affected such that it will affect IT project funding or the timing of those?
So, yeah, revenue is impacted. Inbound cash into the state is lower. And I guess we expect that, right? Because we won't file until July now. Refunds are about the same. Will it affect funding for IT projects? Depends on the General Assembly. We're not in a for-profit, so if I was in a for-profit, I would be obviously very concerned and be looking to start cutting budgets. I don't know what the General Assembly will do. They're going to come into session soon and look. Generally speaking, because revenue is the one that collects the money, we get a lot of scrutiny. They ask a lot of questions, and they should. But generally, what we're trying to do is almost everything we touch, there's a return on the investment. Anything we can do to be more efficient and effective helps the state either bring in the cash, keeps cash flow up, time the cash. We can run more audit, we can run more collections, and we can collect more revenue from the state. So we'll go through the same process where we defend our budgets and any projects that we want to do going forward. But I won't try to predict the General Assembly.
Well, we had Representative Sain on last week, as I mentioned in my opening, and he observed that the legislature's own economist has predicted a more than $1 billion hit to the state as part of this outcome. And also, on the other hand, we have a rainy day fund, We also have a couple of $1 billion that were not allocated or obligated, in part because we don't have a budget amendment. For those of you on the call who are experts at all this, you know this, but North Carolina passes a 2-year budget, and we're at the middle point of that. So there was not an amendment or adjustment to the budget as would typically occur for the year that we're in now, the 2020 cycle. So there's some money there, but that could be used up fairly rapidly and not be around for a long time. But it is a resource that we have if the legislature decides to deploy it, either in direct aid related to COVID-19 or for state operations. We have one more question. Let me see if it's a new one. This is more of a policy question, so I guess I'll end with this one before I move over to Ed. Due to the postponed dates for tax filing in other states that may not be in sync with North Carolina's postponement, the question is, for individuals and businesses that pay taxes in multiple states, are there special guidelines for those taxpayers, or is it just a whack-a-mole situation where you have to file state by state in that way?
So that's easy. Always pay North Carolina first.
That must be a bumper sticker that's on your car. But
No,
I guess
the
question,
you just have to follow state by
is
state
there any
guidance.
accommodation?
Yeah, it's as I understand, most of the states are trying to align with the IRS. Some don't have individual income, obviously, but it is a state by state. We're all uniquely impacted, and each state is uniquely dealing with it. So it literally is a state by state issue, unfortunately, this year.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, unless you have something else you want to add, I think we've hit the questions that have come our way. So we're at a good point to shift to Ed Turlington. Thank you again, David. And Ted, I hope you'll stay on. We're not far from the end of our time here. And so if there's another question that's related to you, I'll kick it back your way. But we usually close out these sessions with, as I mentioned, Ed Turlington from the Brooks Pierce firm for a legislative update. And so I'm going to switch in a moment to a screen that has the document he normally hands out in some shade of yellow, but today it's going to be on white paper, I think, Ed. So I'll let you start while I switch to show everyone the document you'll be referring to.
Thank you, Brooks, and good afternoon to everyone. Our firm is fortunate to be Government Affairs Counsel to NC Tech and has been for over 10 years. My colleague Matt Bales and I do that work. And I would say here at the beginning, and our contact info is on our handout or on our website, we work for the association, your association members. If you ever have government affairs questions, please call us and we will try to answer them. So I'm going to touch briefly on 4 things today. 1, dealing with executive branch actions, and 3, dealing with legislative branch actions. Let me first start with the executive branch. As you know, Governor Cooper and his team have issued a number of orders and actions to deal with our current situation. I watched his press conference today, and some of you have been watching those probably at 2 o'clock on the days, and I was reminded by Emergency Management Director Mike Sprayberry that today is day 45 of the activation of the State Emergency Management Center. And as you know, that's usually where the governor, Mike, Secretary Cogan, Secretary Hooks, and others speak from. That is the organization that is activated when we have these situations, traditionally hurricanes and tornadoes, now the virus. If you want to look at any of the governor's executive orders, you simply go to his website, you click under the news icon, press releases and executive orders, and they're all there. The most visible order is 121, the stay-at-home order, which was issued in March. It is effective through next week, a 30-day order. As you know, it has a number of details related to stay-at-home, what are essential businesses, how many people can congregate, etc. The governor today said at his press conference that this week he will make announcements about what in that order, if anything, continues beyond next week, and he will also make announcements about our state schools. As you know, the schools are closed through May 15th. So at a high level, that's the governor and the executive orders. Early on, weeks ago, working with Brooks, we worked with the governor and his staff to make clear that technology businesses were broadly covered under the definition of essential business so you could continue to do business. So that's executive branch. 3 legislative items I'd flag for you, and you veterans are familiar with some of this, although we're in uncharted territory. As everybody knows, and David and Ted especially, and thank you both for your leadership in state government, we're in fiscal year 2020, which ends June 30th. As Brooks pointed out, a new budget was not enacted in 19, so in FY20, state government is generally spending at FY19 levels pursuant to our automatic spending law, with a few exceptions, and you can see this on your sheet, which I'm sure will be posted on the NC Tech website. The General Assembly in late 19 and 20 did enact a number of mini budget bills to fund particular parts of the government, and you can see many examples there. We listed them at one place if you want to go look at any of that. And then in others, certain bills were vetoed, like pay increases at various levels of education, the moving forward on moving Medicaid to managed care, and then there was a IT project omnibus bill that was vetoed for a reason that had nothing to do with those projects. So Brooks, if you'll move to page 2. So where are we now? As David pointed out, the General Assembly will return to town next week. What's been happening in the last few weeks is the House has been having public meetings of these 4 working groups that I list there, and I listed a few things they've been discussing. 2 of those met today. One tweak to that economic recovery line item, the bill that they voted out today will actually put $75 million of money into a fund, a loan fund for small businesses. The Senate has not been having public meetings, but we know from talking to senators and senior staff that they're working on many of these same issues. And then we've also seen some proposals come out from the Senate Democrats. What we're hearing is going to happen next week is that bills will be introduced probably on the 28th. There'll be some virtual hearings on the 29th, and then there'll be voting of some type in person on the 30th. Members of both houses are talking about how to do that in a way with social distancing. Everything we're hearing, and of course we never know till the session starts, is they will really be focused on virus issues. And let me just give you one example. So last week at the healthcare meeting, a number of the key leaders said everybody knows that telehealth is working. Traditionally, insurers have not paid for telehealth at the same level as an office visit. We, the leaders of the legislature, want to amend that. So, for example, Medicaid would pay at the full rate for a telehealth visit during this virus period, and we would want insurers to do the same. But at least last week's discussion, they're not ready to make that permanent. So that's just an example of the specific virus things. Going down, you see various things related to education, healthcare I've mentioned, and then today I was just listening to the State Government Continuity Committee that has about 30 or 40 items, everything ranging from notary publics to marriage licenses, to us not having to rush in and get our DMV inspection stickers updated when it might not be safe to do so. And then finally, Brooks, and if there are any, I'd be glad to take any questions. All right, is there going to be a post-April legislative session? You hear various points of view on that. One point of view, and I actually saw a tweet today from Representative Chuck McGrady, who many of you know is a very senior member of the House. He was saying something about a session in mid-June where legislators would come back before the end of the fiscal year and adjust the budget. Other members have talked about a session that would begin post-July 15th when David and Ted's department have done their tax collections and we have a sense of what the available money is. And then there's even a school of thought among some that maybe we don't do a session. Maybe we in FY21 use the automatic spending law to spend at the FY19 and FY20 levels. Having been around all of this for 20 years, in my mind, I find it hard to believe that third scenario is the outcome, because so many things have to be adjusted in the budget. And then final thing, Brooks, I think everyone knows by Constitution, we must have a balanced budget. And so the budget director, the departments, legislators as appropriate, are going to have to get us through June 30th with a balanced budget. The good news is, although revenue collections have dropped off substantially, the state does have significant money in the savings reserve account. So at a high level, Brooks, those are a few things I'd flag. Be glad to take any questions.
Thank you, Ed. And as you noted, your contact information is here, but also on our website in our public affairs area. We'll post this there and also include it when we send it out to everyone following this meeting. The only question I would have, just to clarify or to verify something I think you said at the beginning, a lot of people have been asking me, and I'm sure others, what are you hearing? And you just gave us some feedback. I saw the beginning of the governor's press conference today, but not all of it. So next Thursday is the date that the current executive order on stay at home comes to an end. He already has established May the 15th as the term for which public schools will be closed throughout North Carolina and operating remotely. When you say we'll hear sometime this week, was there a specific indication on when this week we would hear? Will it be the end of the week or just this week, on whether there will be an amendment to that April 30th end date?
The governor said this week, and he brought all this up affirmatively. So I think consistent with what he and the Secretary Cogan started the end of the week, last week, when they started talking about the importance of testing. As you remember, he talked about a testing tracing scenario under which the state can begin to authorize various parts of the economy to start opening. So what I heard him say today, three significant things I heard. Number one, they're working intently on this testing issue. He said they have a work group that's working around the clock. He mentioned a double-digit number of labs in North Carolina that can do this. Secretary Cogan noted that our 80-plus public health departments have over 250 staff that have done tracing as their job for many years. And then she also mentioned, without naming it, that the state was talking to a possible private sector partner who could coordinate all of that. And then to answer your question, Brooks, I did not hear the governor say what day of the week, but his rhetoric led me to believe it will not be Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock. I'd be surprised if we don't hear something in the next day or two for the reasons you all know.
People have to plan. Well, thank you. Thank you for that update very much. I want to share with everyone that I mentioned at the beginning of this webinar today that we had hosted an economic forecast or overview session a couple of weeks ago with an economist who talked about updated figures and updated projections and so forth. At that time, and this was just 2 weeks ago, at that time, we had about 225,000 people had filed for unemployment in the first couple of weeks or so since the real midpoint of March, when all this really began to hit jobs. And we now have crossed 600,000 in 4 weeks. By way of comparison, the peak of the Great Recession, we saw 100,000 in a month. So to be at 600,000 in a month, 4 week span, is an exponential increase over what we've ever really experienced before. There's some thought that a lot of those jobs were associated with sectors that truly got shut down or drastically cut. Think about restaurants, personal services like hair and nail salons, entertainment. One of the early announcements was from one of our own members. The Biltmore companies are a member of ours, and we got word, and then you saw in the press it was released from them. They laid off 2,200 workers out of 2,500 and shut the Biltmore estate for the first time since World War II. So one of the questions is whether a lot of those jobs come back quickly once things begin to reopen, and that those kinds of jobs have an opportunity to come back fast. whereas ones that are in organizations and companies like many of the ones on this call may not be as quick to ramp back up, but also may not be as badly hit on the front end. It remains to be seen. So all of that is to say, we conducted these polls that I mentioned, just released the mid-April poll. I would encourage you to take a look at those. There's just 8 slides, 8 questions, each talking about what the respondents are saying with respect to work from home and how that's going, what they're saying with respect to impact on their business. Are they seeing an increase in demand for their business? Is it neutral, or has there been a cut or a reduction? We also asked them about hiring. Are they hiring, continuing to hire, or are they freezing, or are they exploring furloughs and layoffs? And then lastly, we asked for predictions. The 2 quick key questions are, what month do you predict that in-person meetings and get-togethers and sessions will begin to occur again? And the second question is, in what month do you expect measurable economic improvement to begin to show up? The answers to those are pretty interesting. I'd encourage you to take a look. The final question we asked was, what type of recovery do you predict? Will it be this free fall that we're having that will then bottom out, level out, and begin to improve again, or what's referred to as a U-shaped recovery? Will it be something where we are free fall for a while, but once things begin to open up, there will be a quick pivot and an upward trajectory that's strong and sustained? That will be a V-shaped recovery. We offered only those 2 options in the poll thus far. We're going to be adding 2 more options the next time we do the poll. One is a W-shaped recovery, where there's a downturn, a modest uptick when some relaxation occurs. That relaxation could result in additional cases coming up, or the fall may come and there's a natural resurgence just because of the seasonal nature, and there could be another downward tick after that before finally coming out of it on the other end. And the last one that you don't want to have, and I don't think many predict, is an L-shaped curve, where this downfall stops but then stays flat for a long time. So we'll be adding those options in. I do want to remind all of you that are listening in that we have a special session coming up with the new state CIO, who is not new to many of us. She's not new to the department. In fact, she used to be the CIO of the Department of Revenue. But Tracy Dokes is now the new CIO of North Carolina, having been the chief deputy before that. She has named a new chief deputy, by the way, so there is some change at the top. She and her leadership team were scheduled to be with us just before all this virtual business started. So we moved the date to May 21st. It is scheduled to be in person at the iCenter in downtown Raleigh. We're fully prepared for that to convert to virtual like this, should it be necessary. So the date and time will remain the same. We already have 100 people registered for that. I encourage you to register for it if you've not. And stay tuned as to where that will take place, whether virtually like this or in person there at the place I mentioned. I want to thank all of you for being with us today, and to Spectrum Enterprise for sponsoring this session. Special thank you to you, David and Ted, for sharing your time and expertise with us, and to you, Ed, and your colleagues at Brooks Pierce for paying attention to what's going on downtown on our behalf and reporting that back. We do have sponsors and dates already confirmed for the balance of this year for our quarterly gatherings like this one. The 3rd and 4th quarter government vendor network sessions are on our calendar. They are registrable. We will be announcing speakers as we get closer to those. So between now and then, we hope that you continue to come with us with ideas for programming, with questions that we can help you with. And in the meantime, we hope you have a great rest of your week. Thanks very much.